Hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic Podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we're here for episode 46, a pre-holiday recording here. Rod, how are things in Baton Rouge today, brother?
They're fine. They're fine. We've had some proper Christmas weather. It was cold and rainy yesterday, but of course, on Christmas Day here, it's going to be 80 degrees.
Yeah, not so much up here in Rhode Island. It'll be rainy and cold, so we won't get the white Christmas. But anyway, look, today we've got a friend of yours on, Sean Clifford. Rod, what's going on before we say hello to Sean? What's up?
Sean and I've known each other for 2 or 3 years now. He lives in Austin, Texas. He runs a tech company. But we recently had dinner in New Orleans. He was in New Orleans on business. We had dinner, and I was talking to him about the software company he runs, which has developed an anti-porn software for families to use. And as Sean and I had this wonderful dinner in New Orleans, he was telling me the things that he has learned about how porn is eating the world. And I like to think of myself as fairly well educated about this sort of thing. But Sean was telling me things that just made my jaw drop. And I said, we've got to have you on our podcast, Sean, to talk about the danger and to talk about tools that parents can use to fight this scourge. So he agreed to come on, and here he is.
Sean, thanks for coming, brother. How are things?
Doing well, thank you. Always sunny in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
It's weird that here we are on, for us Christians anyway, a holiday week, and yet we're talking about something really, really dark. But this topic is so important, Sean, that we shouldn't delay talking about it or not talk about it because it's really unpleasant. And the conversation you and I had over dinner really made this front and center for me. So could you talk about what you mean when you say porn is eating the world?
Absolutely. And just one quick thing I'll throw in there, Rod. It's timely in some respects. I'll just throw out 2 quick things that I think bring this to the fore right now. One of which is, this is the time of year when more American families will get their kids new devices, oftentimes their first one. And so that's a good thing in the sense that technology can bring us to incredible things, whether in education, social life, whatnot, but it also comes with a lot of challenges. So for folks that are contemplating that, I would urge you to think carefully about what comes with it. And the second thing is, this week, Billie Eilish is one of the more popular pop stars, had an interview with Howard Stern, and she said that porn destroyed her brain. She was exposed when she was 11 years old, and it has had a devastating impact on her life. And so this has gotten a lot of attention. And just one of the things that I'll note, which is an introduction to the broader topic, many more parents were shocked by this than their kids were.
Right.
Really?
Yeah. What do you make of that? I mean, I think that's right, because my sort of opening question to you is that, we can all acknowledge sort of with knowing nods that, porn is ubiquitous and it's all over the place. And yet there seems to be this sort of willful blind spot in terms of the way it has seeped its way into, has enchanted our children. And yet nobody really wants to talk about it or even acknowledge that that's a possibility. What do you make of this sort of willful blind spot, Sean?
I think a lot of it stems from the framework that so many people have with respect to pornography is a dated one. They still call to mind an old Playboy magazine or the old VHS tape or the ways in which it was accessed, even honestly, like 20 years ago. Yeah. And that world is just gone. And the new world is so profoundly different. But if you bring that old understanding of it to today, it's bad. Right, you have Kanye West, who said that he first experienced porn when he was under 10 years old, and it forever shaped him. So like Playboy could have a profound impact on you, but nowhere near the potency of what you can find today. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's that, porn is age old. Plato warned about this when it was drawings on little clay shards. So this is something that's been around, but never quite like it is today.
Can you unpack that? You've told me before that new porn is not the same as old porn. Bearing in mind the format here, can you give us some examples?
Absolutely. So look, I think there's a few areas. First, new porn is immediately accessible in a way that it used to be you had to work hard to find pornography. You either had to know someone who had access to a stash, usually under an uncle's bed, or you had to go to the sketchy part of the video store, and you had to work hard for it. Now, with a few clicks of a button, at any time of day, anywhere you are, you can access pornography. Number two, it's nearly infinite. Playboy afforded you, 12 static images. You now have unlimited access to nearly infinite content with every kind of variety. And that actually is one of the most important distinctions, because that gives porn the ability to shape your brain in a much deeper level than the old Playboy ever could.
What do you mean by deeper level, Sean? Sorry, what do you mean by it shapes you in a deeper level? Are you talking like biochemically, spiritually? What do you say?
Neuroplasticity? What?
All of the above. All of the above.
Okay.
So a few things. One, static images are visually compelling and can have an impact on the brain.
Mm-hmm.
A static image compared to an HD video that's much more realistic and animated and energetic is going to have a deeper impact on the brain. So I think of this in terms of potency. Mm-hmm. Playboy was, let's say, 4 out of 10 on potency. The new porn is like an 8 out of 10, mm-hmm. right? And I'm only reserving that final 2 because we're going to go into meta and like it's going to take it to a whole new level. So
meta as in the latest Zuckerberg iteration of the next phase.
Yeah, we talk at our company right now. Our biggest concern is that we've got a little 3-inch screen that we want to keep stuff off of. Mm-hmm. And someday, I hate to say this, but I think we'll laugh at how quaint that was when we've got the new augmented reality, where it is an immersive experience and you can get in there. And if we think what you encounter now is compelling, just wait until it's immersive.
How close are we to immersive pornographic reality?
A lot closer than you'd think. I mean, you're already finding like the pornography industry has invested a lot of money to kind of push the boundaries. They've actually, when you look at the development of the internet, they've always been at the forefront, first trying to make sure that their videos could load faster, then figuring out how to train algorithms to provide exactly the right content to keep you engaged and coming back. So they're, from a technological perspective, pretty sophisticated, and they are investing a lot of money into augmented reality, virtual reality. Because that's obviously, especially as more and more people are lonely and their brains have been warped to the extent that they crave this, then they can only find it. And just one quick thing there, when you become addicted to porn, you find less pleasure from everyday normal activities, but you find a hyperactivity with respect to pornography. It's the thing that actually is the only thing that can stimulate you in many cases. So, with that in mind, they're constantly pushing the boundaries to find new ways to get you drawn in.
More and more perverse ways. I mean, I remember one of the things that shocked me the most about our conversation at dinner was you talking about how we're seeing like 21, 22-year-old males with erectile dysfunction. I mean, how does that happen?
It's a great question. So the stat that I am referring to there came from a guy, Dr. Jimmy Myers. He's a certified sexual addiction therapist. And he shared that if you go back to the year 2020 and you looked at men who sought medical attention for erectile dysfunction, effectively 0 of the cases were men below the age of 30. Today, something like 25% of all men who seek medical attention for erectile dysfunction are under the age of 30. And what's changed is something called porn-induced erectile dysfunction, or PIDE. And whereas kind of the traditional erectile dysfunction stems from just kind of the pipes wearing down with age, and that's something that, Viagra can address, this new form of PIDE stems from physical changes in the brain, where you have become so accustomed to a certain type of stimulation that you can be in the presence of someone that you love, who's very attractive, and yet it doesn't matter because your brain needs that extra form of stimulation in order to kind of kick off the whole process. And so it's something that's psychologically done. The other kind of interesting thing I'll point out there is the good news is, thanks to neuroplasticity, you can recover from this. But they found that for men who were older, who adopted the internet later, the return to normalcy took about 2 months. For the younger generation, it was 4 to 5 months.
Wow.
This is because they're being exposed at a point when the brain is still developing, and it's just much more formative.
And one thing that I can't remember if this is something you and I talked about or I read somewhere else, is that with the need to find new and different areas of stimulation, once you get bored with a certain kind of porn, this takes people into some extremely dark areas, bestiality and things like that. What could you tell us about that?
Yes, that actually stems from something called the Coolidge effect, which incidentally is named after President Calvin Coolidge. So it's it's a funny, humorous story. So you can check that out later. But it describes that the brain craves novelty overall, but especially with respect to kind of the sexual reward system. And so one thing that you have found is that pornography is an escalating addiction and requires ever more extreme hits to get that same high. So what we'll find is that, the average 16-year-old boy that starts watching pornography at, let's say 16, although many are exposed earlier, their taste will change over the course of a 2-year period, to the extent that 2 years later, they'll find themselves watching stuff that they would have been shocked to seek out when they were 16. And it's because the brain demands that novelty. And this moves in weird directions. And I mean, Pornhub, which is one of the largest porn websites, comes out with these fascinating data analyses.
Right.
And the most recent one just talks about like the most searched for terms. And there's some weird stuff out there.
I'm scared to ask, but I gotta ask. What are we? If you can.
So Japanese cartoons was the most searched for term. I mean, so that's one example. But like, I'll give you another one. In 2021, more than 50% of the most popular, most viewed videos on the site involve some kind of incest. It's like stepmom with son, and like it is bizarre. But the reason it goes there is you need that novelty, and one of the greatest ways to kind of achieve novelty is by breaking taboos.
Transgression. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
okay.
In a way that like just this did not exist. And so the accessibility of it, the age of exposure, which is dropping, and the age of exposure matters because it shapes your brain more, is driving people to seek out ever greater forms of stimulation and escape. And it's getting weirder every year.
So did you say 50% of the searches in 2021 or 2020? I'm sorry,
50% of the most viewed videos. So if you take the 100 most viewed videos, more than half of them involve in the title, like step this or step that.
Oh my goodness. Really?
Okay, Sean, this is why it's important to be specific here, because so many normie parents, like myself, whose idea of pornography was what we encountered in 1980 when we were teenagers, we just don't want to believe, or we can't imagine that it's like that. And I think one of the reasons that we won't let ourselves imagine this sort of thing is because if this is true, then we're on the hook to do something about it. And we're going to talk about what parents can do later in the podcast. But why are parents reluctant to, from your point of view, why are they reluctant to know what's really out there?
I think it's a few things. One, I honestly think a lot of them just don't know. And I've met so many parents that effectively would shrug if their teenage son encountered pornography, but when they know what they're actually finding out there, they take action. So I do think there's a big percentage that don't know.
So that's that model disconnect that you're talking about, sort of old porn, grandpa's, girly magazine stash versus this sort of hyper violent, transgressive, 24p, high speed internet, kinetic reality.
Yes. And when they become aware of that and what's actually happening, it's shocking and alarming. You sometimes see the ostrich head in the sand just because they don't know what to do about it, which I think is the second reason. So the New York Times had this feature-length piece maybe 3 years ago, and the headline was, the American teenager is watching twice as much pornography as their parents think. It's shaping their views on intimacy, sex, and relationships. And then here's the subheader, the kicker. Can they be taught to see it more critically? And
critically. Well, they have that, by the way.
We'll chuckle at that. But if you accept the proposition that you can't stop it, it is so prevalent, it is so accessible, they're going to be exposed to it. Then the question is, what on earth do you do? And so I think it's that overwhelming nature. It's like you can lock down, and like we need to recognize this. You can lock down every single device in your own home. But if your kid leaves the house and goes to someone else's house or to a Starbucks or to a local library or to the school, like there are going to be devices that they access, and they're going to be exposed to this kind of content. And I hate to say it, but that's just the reality of the world that we live in now. And so I think it's that sense of being overwhelmed that comes with like a futility that I think arrests action on this. I think the third thing is, broadly speaking, we are enamored with our devices. We're in this honeymoon phase. They're still relatively new, right? Keep in mind the iPhone's not even 15 years old now.
It's just 12 years old.
And it is something that connects us to the world, provides a lot of entertainment, especially in the COVID lockdowns, right? This was a lifeline for a lot of people. And we crave it.
I was going to ask you about that, has there been a pandemic and porn effect? The fact that everybody's been locked down, or a lot of people have been locked down for large stretches of time here.
Yeah. So anecdotally, absolutely. Early results from the pandemic suggest that it was kind of an interesting development. Thanks to Nick Kristof at the New York Times in particular, and a couple of other groups, there was an article that went out alleging that a huge percentage of the porn videos on Pornhub were unverified, meaning they probably contained either minors or women that were trafficked. And so they got all the payment processors to stop working with these big porn sites. And they ended up having to take down millions and millions of videos. The net effect of that is every year Pornhub very proudly released, in 2019, they had 42 billion visits to their site. They've not released that for 2020 or 2021, in part because they had to take down so much. And I actually think there was a drop. But yeah, I mean, this stuff is just, it's everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere. And just, if you look at a lot of porn sites get more traffic than Twitter, Instagram, Netflix, and Reddit.
Wow.
It's just astounding.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, the Kristof story is really hopeful. It shows that things can be done. He was one newspaper columnist, and he made this happen. Why are we not seeing so many more public figures, politicians, journalists, and others leading this crusade?
I think there's three things. The first is that for a lot of them, again, the old mindset is if you're against porn, that conjures something to mind. It's a finger wagging prude that's scolding other people, that's not with the program, that guess what? Sexual liberation is here to stay.
Yeah.
And so that whole mentality, when you step out on this, you just expect that you're going to be derided as being weird, or maybe you've got some issues in your closet, or it's just not a popular position to take. So I think that's kind of been the legacy for some time. Secondly, I think there's a broader sense that this issue is just lost. And so what is there to be gained by trying to roll back the clock, when if we couldn't do this in the 2000s, how on earth are we going to do it now? But the third thing I'll say is I actually think you're starting to see a change. You're starting to see a shift on these issues. And I think it's driven by a number of developments. First, the science on this is overwhelming. Thanks to advances in neuroscience and fMRI, brain neuroimaging, you can now see the impact that pornography has on the brain. Thanks to advances in neuroscience, we can see the impact to neurochemistry of a porn addiction. They've been able to map it out. A porn addiction does mirror in some pretty profound ways a heroin addiction or a nicotine addiction. So we're understanding this, and that's leading to the emergence of these white lab coat wearing Johns Hopkins public health officials saying you shouldn't vape, and you shouldn't eat those trans fat potato chips over there, and you shouldn't watch porn. And so that's a new development that you didn't have 20, 30 years ago. The second is I think there's a bottom up aggregation of people that have experienced the suffering caused by pornography in a personal level, themselves in their marriage, a child. And it is, it's kind of revolting. And they're not talking about it publicly because there's a lot of shame, but the resonance, when you have people that actually post about this, it is whether it was Billie Eilish or Kanye West or Terry Crews or John Mayer. I mean, there's a lot of public officials, celebrities in particular, that have come out and said it's been terrible for them. You're starting to see more of that. And that resonates with their audience in a way that 30 years ago, they would have been like, why is he talking about that? But now people are like, yeah, I know I personally know 2 divorces in the past year that are specifically attributed to porn. And I don't think
Yeah.
that's an isolated case.
Yeah, I know a couple myself, explicitly so. The breakdown was directly tied to that.
Well, I was just going to ask. We've seen the statistics, Sean, showing that young people, teenagers, young adults, are having much less sex than before. But I don't think this is necessarily good news. If they were doing it for moral reasons, that would be a victory. But if they're doing it because the males are locking themselves up in their room and going into this pseudo porn world, that is worse than the other, it seems to me. I mean, what does our research tell us about the extent to which this drop in sexual intimacy among the young has to do with pornography?
It's a great question. I think there's a very strong argument to be made that fake sex and fake war are behind a lot of the social isolation that people encounter today. This predates COVID. And you're seeing this actually manifested across the board. They're getting their driver licenses later. They're meeting up in person later. So much of their world, their social life, has actually moved online. And this is across the board. And Dr. Jean Twenge, who wrote the book iGen, documented some of these longitudinal studies that have been around and has always seen little ups and downs. And something profound happened in about the year 2010. And there's just been a stark change in the data. And much of this she attributes to the onset of the smartphone. With respect to pornography explicitly, yeah, it is fulfilled. So this, the sexual stimulation you get from a screen scratches an itch. And whereas people used to go out and go to bars and talk to people and do all host of things in person, it's just not happening anymore. And again, all this predates COVID. It's been exacerbated during all the lockdowns, but this was a trend that was set in motion when the smartphone really achieved widespread penetration among American teenagers. And so I think the big question is, where do we go from this? And I'll give you two examples. One is if you've been watching pornography for, let's say, 3 or 4 years as a teenager, which is not an uncommon thing, by the time you're 18, you will have seen over, in all likelihood, 10,000 naked women. How on earth do you go from that to being able to enter into a serious relationship? And there's this, someone refers to it, I think it's Sarah Swafford, she talks about the alter switch. This idea that I'll do this now. And then when I'm ready to settle down or whatever, I just flip the switch and I'm a different person. And it doesn't work. Your brain does not work that way. These,
and we just, expanding this outside of just the contours of porn, this is not the way that we work. It's not like you can, be a couch potato for, a decade and then run a marathon tomorrow. That these we're heavily conditioned in our behaviors, these sort of long stories. So I think the switch idea we kid ourselves, right, with this idea of a switch.
Yeah. And but that's that. I think that's we live in a very fluid age. One might even call it a liquid modern age. And you find that people believe that they can change their identity in any host of things. This idea that you're fixed and that there are certain things that are going to define you and shape you with over extended period of time is foreign. It's resistant. We all like to think that we're autonomous from that. And so I think that's part of it. The other thing that I would just quickly say on this point is that for these people that are at home, that are viewing this kind of content, it is shaping their longings. And so, Rod, you and I talked about this great book by James K. Smith, You Are What You Love, which talks about how your longings actually shape your habits or your habits shape your longings in a pretty profound way, and your habits actually define your identity. And this is inculcating habits that prioritize titillation and novelty, that habituate you to think about other people as objects for your own satisfaction of appetites, and sets in motion expectations and sexual templates that are hard to shrug off over time. And so once you've kind of gone through that gauntlet and you come to the other end, undertaking the hard work of going out into the world and interacting with real people that have their own desires and their own expectations. And it's tricky. And I've been married for 14 years now, and it requires give and take. And this world does not set you up to compromise either because it's all about you and satisfying your needs. And also the other thing is there's always something greater on the next click. Never satisfied. There's always another thing. And this, I think, translates into the dating world and just interaction with other people. It's like, get into a little argument or a little squabble, just go on to the next one. It's just one more swipe away.
Yeah, this idea of take, I'm struck by this idea, Sean, that pornography, is something that you consume, right? I mean, that's the language that we use for this sort of thing, right? It's use, right? It's getting you off. It's a mechanism, to get off, et cetera. And, that is just so counter to an actual, as you're saying, as an actual relationship. One of my intellectual heroes is John Paul II. And, he talks about in one of his books, I think it's Sign of Contradiction. But anyway, he talks about this idea that the opposite of love is not really hate, but the opposite of love is use. And so if you have conditioned yourself, right, to be in this sort of user mentality, it's almost as if it inoculates you from genuine love as self-gift. Love as service, right? And I love this idea that you're being shaped, right? And we are being shaped. And I think you make this point that we're being shaped in essence by digital algorithms by way of our devices.
Yeah, it is transforming us in profound ways that often escape our notice because each successive step is so subtle and small and seemingly innocuous.
Right.
But over time, aggregated up, it has a profound effect. I keep using that word, but it really is transforming us in ways that we don't often appreciate. But looking back, you can see that we're in a different place. And this is across the board. If you look at the statistics around pornography, if you look at the mental well-being of American teenagers today, if you look at the divorce rates that are attributed to porn, like almost on any metric you want to look at, these devices have had some serious consequences. And again, I'm pro-tech and I don't think they're going away even if we wanted to. And so we have to figure out how to live well with them. But they are not without, as enamored as we are, they're not without their cost. And that for me is the great challenge. How do we figure out how to put them in their proper place so that we can enjoy the good without some of the negative sides that regrettably attend them?
Sean, tell us how you yourself got involved in this world as in terms of your company, Canopy, but also in terms of your family. You're a husband and a family man.
There were three things that drew me in. First and foremost, as you just alluded, I've got my own kids. I've got 4 kids. They're still young, and I desperately want them to have a chance to be kids. And I would love for them to grow up with a healthy understanding of what a good relationship looks like, and someday to fall in love and get married and be happy in that. And all of that is a lot harder if we can't address this issue. I think the second thing is I've just seen immense suffering caused by pornography. I have a good friend, Evan Loomis, who's the lead investor for our company. And the second time we ever met, we had coffee in DC. And he asked the question, what would you do if you had $50 million, never had to work again? And so I gave my answer and I asked him the same. And he said, I would dedicate myself to overcoming the scourge of pornography. Wow. And this was 2007. This was the first time I'd ever heard someone talk about this issue as if it actually warranted much greater attention and reflection. It wasn't just kind of something on the back burner that was bad, but kind of a nuisance. And so that kind of planted the seed for like, And since then, I've just seen the immense suffering that this causes. It really damages a lot of lives, and we're not speaking about it in that language, and we're not treating it with the attention that other sources of misery are being treated. And then I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want to pick up on that because it's a question that I've been dying to ask you here. Is that, I'm sure you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work, on the effects of social media, especially on girls. And he and his writing partner, Greg Lukianoff, have, I think, very convincingly shown that we can really date it to the apps being available on our smartphones in terms of young girls' mental health. What I never hear anyone talk about, except for you right now, is we know that social media has a profound negative effect on girls, much more so than boys. I mean, like radical, substantially different. Yet, I wonder if people like Haidt and others, don't ask the next questions. Well, okay, so we've established this with girls, but we have really kind of ignored the effects of the devices on boys. Have you noticed this sort of same kind of blind spot, or?
Yeah, I have, and I'm biased. I've got a hammer, so I see lots of males. But, Look, whether it's Haidt's piece or probably the single most impactful cultural artifact that kind of explores this is the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, which walks through how these algorithms have been set up to hack the cognitive vulnerabilities of the average American teenager. And pornography was not mentioned a single time.
Once. So blew me away. I had look, that's a profound movie. I'm so grateful that movie exists. I recommend it to every parent that I can get my, that comes in front of me. But it's a staggering omission to me. Staggering.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I liken it to like, imagine having a movie about the drug epidemic and not covering like opioids.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's this problem out there. But so like, if you actually care about addictive elements, and there's actually been studies, there was a Dutch study that came out that said, like, of all internet activity, pornography is the most addictive. And I'm not overly surprised by that, but it's just not getting attention. So to your point, I think so much of the energy right now is focused on social media. And in part because two things. One, we have a well-worn framework where there's a big company out there that engages in nefarious activities to addict you and profit off of your suffering. And this is like the big tobacco playbook that's been run over and over and over again.
Right.
So it fits a pre-existing narrative.
Yeah, it's a PIP, it's a PIP narrative, right? I mean,
PIP?
It's what it is. Yet the obvious version of that gets ignored. Sorry, I keep
right. So it's funny to me. It's like you talk about how the tech industry can be exploitative, and a part of me wants to whisper. It's like, guys, there's an even more exploitative one.
That's right. That's right.
Right over there. I'll show you. I won't show you. I shouldn't show you.
I should. Right, I won't show you.
I'll tell you about it. But yeah, I think to your point, like Haidt has been focused on this, and I think there's a few things. Part of it is when you look at the data. You've seen a doubling in self-reported major cases of depression over the past 10 years. But for adolescent girls, it's twice as much. So boys went from 5% to 10% of the teenage boys have had a major depressive episode. Girls, it's like 12.5 to 25. So I do think part of the emphasis in looking at this is just the data shows that like teenage girls' mental health as it manifests in the surveys is there and it's real and it's problematic. I don't think they're asking about the impact of pornography. And I think one of the things, the template that I briefly say here is, I think of pornography as akin to, unlike other addictions like meth, you can't be a high functioning meth addict for long. But I think porn is more akin to radiation. It gets in you and can warp you in ways that seem subtle, but over time, man, it can wreck you. But you don't see it immediately. And that's why the attention is a little bit off.
Yeah. So anyway, so as I've been thinking about this, as we were having our email exchanges back and forth and, sort of preparing for this show, one of the things that's sort of haunting me in the background is, and I think it picks up here with what you're laying out, is this sort of whole failure to launch crisis, like a Jordan Peterson thing that he keeps talking about is that like, men are not doing well right now. Like the masculinity crisis is a very real thing, whereas it seems like young women have been able to sort of play out and into sort of the meritocratic laptop, class, but boys are, right? Boys and then young men, they're not, they're not even able to get into and maintain successful lives as college students, much less as young professionals. And so maybe we see the long-term effects of the silent killer. The long-term effects are sort of porn use amongst boys versus the sort of the social media contagion with girls.
I think that's right. I mean, if I had to put my own gloss on it, I think it's girls are really struggling during their teen years. and it is showing up in the data, and it's having a big impact. I think boys are experiencing this failure to launch, right? You're not seeing the suicide attributed to social media as much among them, but they're not growing out of their adolescence, or they're struggling to grow out of their adolescence at greater rates than girls.
Well, and think about it, if you look at, you mentioned earlier, that if you have this sort of mechanism that you plug yourself into that precludes you from adventure and precludes you from meaning, right? These are the sort of the two reasons why a young boy, leaves his basement, right? Is that the seeking of adventure and the seeking of romantic attachment, right? To sort of build a life outside of his sort of his mom and his dad. Porn and video games have basically have gamed that. Sorry, it's a bad pun, but have gamed those kind of internal mechanisms that might force a boy, might force a Bilbo to leave his shire, to borrow the Lord of the Rings. So it's not terribly surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean they're very compelling. The only thing that I'll say there, I think that there's a recognition deep down that the kids aren't happy.
Yeah,
they know this.
Yeah.
They recognize that they're not living well, that their peers aren't happy. I mean, one of the quotes that we heard when we were doing interviews of teenagers is, "I hate my phone. It makes me miserable. Yeah. The only thing that I could imagine that would be more miserable is not having my phone."
Yeah. Well, I regularly survey I teach high school, so I regularly survey my kids, and most of them too want to be like, "Man, take this thing from me. Take this thing from me." It's like this, again, it's like this weird burden that they can't get rid of.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the great questions for us is in an age where there's effectively unlimited stimulation, soma, if you will, like how do you actually persuade people to get off the couch, get off the screen, and like go live the life that we're meant to live? And it's a hard one, but it's an essential one and an urgent one.
Sorry, I was muted. Sean, tell us about your company, Canopy. How did you start it, and how can it help parents fight this fight on behalf of their kids?
So Canopy was launched, we raised around in 2019, and we're bringing some amazing technology developed in Israel to the United States market. The real hope is that we want to empower families to exercise more control over their online digital experience. We think this control has been shifted from the families themselves to algorithms, oftentimes set up and run by outside forces that don't have the best interest of you or your family in mind. And that's a big problem, because when you're going online today and there are tools out there, whether it's an app or a social media platform that has been designed by some of the best scientists and clinical psychologists of the age to hack into what you're doing and to harvest as much of your attention as possible, it's not a fair fight. And so we think that's a problem. More people are waking up to it. But even if you recognize the problem, we didn't think that there were sufficient tools out there to help them overcome it or do something about it. So Canopy really aspires to emerge as the pro-family tech company that's addressing a lot of the harms caused by unfettered access to our devices and the internet. The initial way that we're doing that is we've got, I think, the world's best tool for identifying and blocking pornography in real time. We've got advanced artificial intelligence that's 99.7% accurate at identifying nudity. And it works in the background of a device. Anytime you're in a browser, you can type in a website. If it's a brand new porn site, never before been scanned, launched 5 minutes ago, we'll catch it and block it. If you go to Twitter, which has a lot of pornography, we can strip out the pornographic elements and still serve up the Elon Musk roasts and cat memes, whatever it is you're finding there.
Yeah.
So it's a real-time tool to ensure that you have a porn-free internet experience. That's kind of the first thing. We also are starting to develop more tools. We just launched something where you can block specific apps or websites. We'll give you more time control abilities. And alongside that, we're trying to put together the content to guide parents to serve as a Sherpa, because right now it's hard, right? I talk to parents all the time, and the one anecdote that I'll share is talk to a mom, and she's like, finally figured out Facebook. And I was like, oh, honey, like that's 3 or 4 years ago. But it's hard, right? And it's very difficult to keep up. And so we want to emerge as a resource to kind of help hold hands and get you what you want from the internet, right? I don't think it's for tech companies to decide that. So we're not trying to push our own vision on you. We're trying to give you the tools so that you can make sure your kids, and oftentimes we'll have adults themselves have these tools on their devices so that it's serving their intentions, not just harvesting their attention.
Sure.
So how does it work? Do people download Canopy software onto their phones or laptops?
Yeah, so Canopy is software. You would download it to a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet. And once you it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to get it set up on a device, and then it just works in the background. We like to think of it as a scalpel, not a butcher's cleaver. Overblocking was a huge problem in some of the earlier iterations of internet filters, which itself kind of is viewed as a pejorative that has a bad reputation. And so we've tried to come with precision, and that's by scanning everything in real time and not relying on an outdated list or forcing an all or nothing choice with respect to websites. We think will allow you to experience the good without the bad. We don't want to be the kind of invasive force that your child hates that leads to a lot of arguments and fights that ultimately then results in it being uninstalled because it's just not worth the friction in the household.
So where do people get this software?
Thank you for asking. You can go to canopy.us. And on our website, we explain how it works, the platforms we cover. We're on Android, Windows, and Mac and iOS. And also a little bit about how the tech works, what we do, what we don't do. I think we're an incredible tool. We always want to communicate as much as we can about exactly what we do, where the limitations are, so that parents can really take that and set in motion the safeguards that they need. We have invested a lot of time and energy to try and make this as user-friendly, but then also as tamper-proof as possible. And it's hard work. We don't always have other tech companies helping us along the way, but that's the nature of the challenge. And we're excited to be here in the States, in the market at long last.
Sean, is this a silver bullet?
Don't believe in silver bullets. No. I think that, the Gospel Coalition put a little piece out about Canopy and called it the most effective technology on the planet to block pornography. I think that's true. I think if you want to ensure that your kids' exposure is minimized to the greatest degree possible, Canopy is, in my humble opinion, the best tool out there to do that. But I don't think there's a silver bullet that will enable parents to escape the hard work, but also the privilege of parenting. In part because there will always be another device, and in part because the broader culture is still sending you signals about what you should think about these things that oftentimes run counter to what you might want to pass on to your own kids. And so putting a tool is not going to free you from having that awkward conversation with your child earlier than you'd probably like about what they're going to encounter in the world. But our hope is it creates enough space so that you can be the one to talk to your kid about pornography and sex, and not some porn website or anonymous stranger or search engine. And so, guess what? That's where kids are going for it right now.
So I got a question. I watched some of the materials that you sent to me and Rod, and it was good. It was great. And this Canopy thing, I was impressed because I was not fully aware or conscious, I should say, that every app that you have basically has a browser built into it as well. And so that was interesting that Canopy can even kind of, it operates in that space as well, which I think is good. And I think parents should know that. I was also, that using Google Maps, and then if you can't find it, you do a sort of an end around Google search to that. I thought that was illuminating. And again, I think most parents would have no idea about that sort of thing. But one of the things that I've become aware of in the last couple of months is this, like on Instagram, this thing called Reels. I think it's called Reels, which is just sort of, it's sort of like their version of TikTok. And so my two questions for you is, in the middle of the pandemic, TikTok really hit the scene. And I had students of mine who confessed to me that they were watching TikTok at levels that you can't even believe is possible. Like 6-7 hours a day, if not more, of TikTok running in the background with Reels at the real. Now, how about that? I mean, how does Canopy deal with something like an Instagram reel or a TikTok reel?
It's a great question. And the first thing I'll say is with some humility, I downloaded TikTok for work research.
Yeah.
And 6 hours later, I got off it.
Yeah, right. No, it's unbelievable. No, amen. I'm right there with you, Sean. I did a similar thing, and I'm like, holy crap, this is just, it's woof.
It's incredibly entertaining. So I understand, I sympathize with the allure, and I'm sympathetic to those that spend a lot of time on there. So look, Canopy's solution works in a few ways there. So first, on iOS devices, we can filter within the TikTok app. Mm-hmm. And so we can ensure that you're not going to be exposed to pornographic content in a TikTok video. We're the only two out there that can do that. And regrettably, there is porn on TikTok. On Instagram, we can't filter within the app, but we can filter Instagram within a browser. So a lot of our parents will just block TikTok, the app, or excuse me, block Instagram, the app.
Yeah.
Their kids will go on the browser. Functionality is not exactly the same, but most parents say the trade-off is worth it, and you can post through the browser. And so we're constantly working. We've got a couple tech advances that I think will enable us to do more there. But you're alluding to the addictiveness of some of these platforms. Yeah. And there, I think there's a few things. One, I think we enable parents to block certain apps and websites or categories of websites. Like you can block all social media platforms. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough thing because so much of American kids' social life now exists on these platforms. And to take that step has pretty significant consequences for your teen.
I'm in the middle of that right now, Sean. I've got a 14-year-old, and that's our line in the sand right now. Is it no, and we know that makes you weird, honey. But yeah. No.
So I think there's a few things with respect to the addictive nature. You can block it outright. Right now, we can do that. Number two, you can set time limits either per like TikTok itself has parental controls where you can set time limits. We can walk you through that. And the third thing is, and we think this is incredibly important, there should be times during the day and potentially even a whole day. What a concept where you're not being, you're not encountering the digital world.
Digital Sabbath.
So
they talk about it, Rod, that way. They talk about it as a digital Sabbath.
Yeah.
And I've been at conferences where they've mentioned that.
That's in the Benedict option.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Sorry.
And I think that Andy Crouch has this great book, The Tech-Wise Family. And one of the great lines from it is, your device should go to bed before you and wake up after you. And another place I saw that the average American teenager today sleeps less than they did 100 years ago when they were on a farm and they had to wake up to feed the chickens and milk the cows. And it's completely attributed to our devices. The Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, once said that his greatest competitor is sleep.
Man, that's so true, though. It's true. Gosh.
Sean, you and I, let's switch away from tech for a second.
Yeah.
Everybody in this room here today, the three of us, we're all practicing religious men. Mm-hmm. You yourself practice Judaism. What would you have religious leaders, pastors, rabbis, all religious leaders understand about the porn phenomenon?
I would say a few things. First, they just need to know and understand at a deep level how pervasive and impactful it is. And I say that I think the vast majority actually do. Those that serve in any sort of pastoral role, where they're actually interacting with their congregants and trying to help them navigate life, understand just how problematic this has become. So I think they get that, but equipping them to understand just how addictive it is can be helpful. The second thing that I would encourage them to do is nature abhors a vacuum. And are we making a sufficient case? Are they making the case calling people to something greater and really advancing both that this is going to make you miserable? And you can, here, I actually think the science really is compelling. This is going to make you miserable. Let me walk you through all the ways in which, and that's appealing to a slightly different authority, but sometimes it's helpful because most congregants know where their pastor or rabbi sits on this issue. But bringing in an alternative source of authority sometimes can be helpful on that. And I think the third thing that I would encourage them to really dwell on and to help people through is once they've encountered it, how on earth can you set up a mechanism for them to walk away from it? And that is so hard, but community helps a lot. Having positive reinforcement helps a tremendous amount as people are struggling with like an addiction. And if we treat this like an addiction in the same way that alcoholism, a different set of tools come to mind and a different way of kind of working with people that are in this. Oftentimes there's shame associated with pornography because people believe that it is their own moral failure and their inability to rise above it is a reflection of their own weakness. Mm-hmm. And the language I hear from people that are addicted is, I'm trapped. I don't want to do this. I want to stop. I've wanted to stop for years. I just can't get out of it. And so if you have a position of authority where you can lean into the people that want to escape and kind of equip them for it, I think that's powerful. The last thing I'll say on this, there was a particular religious denomination that was trying to understand why people were walking away from the flock. And they found that pornography was one of the greatest drivers of that turn away. And it was in that people would, here was what they reported through this research. People would consume pornography. They would assume a distance then, because they knew that it was problematic according to their moral teachings. They would feel a distance between their congregation and the shame that came with it. Also a distance between themselves and God. And that they would internalize, I think the language they used, they internalized the sin and said that I'm the problem. And then this was like the off-ramp. And it just ushered them along, and that the extent to which you could arrest the consumption of pornography might actually hold. And look, there's a lot of reasons why people are walking away from faith, but this is a big driver. And so for those that are trying to figure out why the pews aren't quite as full as they once were, like I do think that this is something that plays a role.
Wow. Well, powerful stuff.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a question on that one, I guess. What do you say to these people who might say, well, we should pursue, ethically sourced porn? I mean, I've heard that from religious
I've seen
leaders.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so not to make too much light of it, but I have a colleague who refers to that as grass-fed porn. And look,
that's actually good.
There's two things. So the first is the part that the advocates of ethically sourced porn get right is that there is a lot of non-consensual pornography that is out there featuring underage minors and trafficked women. And it is horrific. And like that needs to be attacked full on. It is a modern day form of slavery and it is terrible. And like, we need to draw more attention to that and do something about it. And I think, in the words of William Wilberforce, once you know what actually is taking place, you may ignore it, but you can never again say you didn't know. And so like that part, I will say gets right. Then I'll say like, okay, fine. Let's actually understand the reality of how pornography is consumed out there today. And so let's imagine this hypothetical world in which all the pornography is ethically sourced. Is it still addictive? Yes. Is it still resulting in failure to launch? Yes. Is it still driving people towards more extreme, graphic, and violent behaviors? Yes. Is it still causing the dissolution of marriages and failure to launch? Yes. So even if we address this very dark and ugly side of it, which we absolutely should, I don't think it's addressing the broader reality of how pornography is being consumed today and the impact it's having. It addresses part of it, but there's a broader array of problems that arise from this that just aren't there. And what they talk about is like, they always have this this one ideal couple that like has incorporated pornography into their marriage and it's great for them. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but the vast majority of people out there are not like that. And it's making them miserable and causing a lot of suffering.
Yeah, I feel like, last thing, Rod, I just wanted to hit this. It seems to me that we have become comfortable as a culture, talking about junk food, junk entertainment, junk drugs, and even, junk science. But yet we seem incapable of recognizing junk sex. And it seems to me that porn, certainly as the compelling case that you're laying out for us right now, and any wish to accommodate ourselves to it is the equivalent of kind of accommodating ourselves to kind of a junk life. a throwaway life, a novel, a life that's constantly predicated on the novel is really not a life at all.
Completely agree. I think if you've set novelty out, and whether we have this as a social concept or the way that novelty actually, like our brains crave it, and if you hardwire that in to be the thing that you seek out, the true, the good, and the beautiful will find infertile soil to be planted in. And so I think that's a challenge that we face. There's an interesting guy, Paul Graham. He's one of the founders of Y Combinator. And back in 2010, he wrote an essay called The Acceleration of Addiction. And at the very end of it, he says, we're moving into a more addictive world. And it may very well be that in the future, we'll be defined not by what we consume or say yes to, but actually by what we say no to. And I think there's a lot in there that I'd love to unpack. The one add-on I'll say, there's an interesting book. Scientist Dr. Robert Lustig wrote a book called The Hacking of the American Mind. Wow. One of the points he makes is that our brains were not designed for this level of temptation. The average cup of coffee you get today is like 2 to 4 times more addictive, or it has 2 to 4 times more caffeine than it did 40 years ago. Yeah. On almost every single dimension of the things that we consume, we've entered into this next level of potency and intensity. Whether it's the junk food, we figured out how to hack the brain there. Whether it's the online experience, be it a video game, a social media platform that has digitized validation, or it's pornography, which scratches a deep, hardwired itch that we have, and it's very difficult for us to overcome. And we've just never encountered this before, and the cultural antibodies, so to speak, have not yet caught up.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
This has been an incredible hour with you, Sean. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. And remind us again of where online people can get the software from your company.
Really appreciate that, Rod. They can go to canopy.us. That's our website. They can find out more about the software itself. And especially as we head into this new year, we're starting to do more both to try and raise awareness about the issue overall, but provide just resources and tips for first families. But second, we're going to be producing some content for kids themselves on how they should think about this stuff, right? As the consumers who are in it, who recognize that this is causing problems, how can they walk towards something greater that makes them more fulfilled in their lives? So we're just getting started. We have a lot more work to do, but we're grateful to be in the arena. And again, it's canopy.us.
canopy.us. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
From Austin, Texas.
It's been amazing. Thank you so much. All right, Rod, on that note, why don't you send us out, brother?
Merry Christmas and don't get nothing on you.
Take care. Bye-bye.